Alright, hey everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Chapter 8. And what Chapter 8 covers is just a little deeper dive into classes and object. These are our topics that we're going to cover. I'm not sure if this is going to be a two-part video or a one-part video. We will have to see. And yeah, these are all the topics that we will cover today. Alright, so let's recall static methods and static fields. So the difference between static or not static is because is when static fields and static methods, they do not belong to any single instance of a class. So they do not belong to any single object specifically or any single class. And what that means is that whenever you're calling whatever method that static method is, you're using a class name, and otherwise you would use an object's name right here instead of a class name. So that's the only thing that's different, is that the static methods, they do not belong to any object. They belong to the whole class. Now, static fields work the same way, and the only difference is that your static field, it's gonna have an access specifier, right? And then after this access specifier, you're gonna put the keyword static. And what it's gonna do, this is an example of a static variable. In this case, we are counting how many objects have been created. In this case, it's 3, so our static variable is 3. This variable does not belong to any of these objects. It belongs to the class. So to create a static method, you just put the static in between of the access modifier and the return type of your method. So public or private, and here is going to be a data type or void, and in between of those you put static. And why would we do that? Well, because whenever you create a static method, it's not necessary to create an object to use those methods. So for example, right here, kilos per mile, this is just a method that's going to translate miles to kilometers, and in this case we don't have to create an object of the metric class. We can just use this method without creating an object, which is kind of useful. The only thing that you need to know about the static methods is that they cannot communicate with your instance fields. And remember that instance fields are those variables that belong to each object whenever they are created. Now, I know it's a lot of words: static, object, instance. If you're not understanding, please reach out to me and I will walk you through it, because I know it can be difficult to understand all of these terms and get them in your head to understand. So why would we use static methods? Again, I'll repeat, because we can use them without creating an object. We can use them at the class level. And also, most of those static methods, you will see them they are from utility classes, such as the math class. To perform any calculations that you want, you do not have to create an object, right? So the math class, a utility class, it has a lot of static methods. Alright, let's recall passing objects as arguments, even though we covered it in chapter 6. But yes, you can pass your object as arguments to certain methods, and in Java, all of your arguments that you pass, they're passed by value. And what that means is that not the copy of your object is being passed, but what your object stores is being passed. So basically, you're kind of pointing in the direction of the object instead of passing the whole copy of the object. So I hope that makes sense. Basically, think of it as you're passing the contents of your object and not your actual object. However, if your method receives that object, it's possible for that method to modify the contents of your object that you're passing. Now, in this case, look at this. We have a method display rectangle, and we're passing an object called box. And our object has 2 variables, length 12, width 5. And what we are doing is that we are passing that object as an argument right here into our parameter are. And what it's gonna do is just gonna display the length and widths that are stored inside of our object. In this case, using our getters, we are able to access the methods of this object, which is get length and get width, and we are just printing those values out. Now, we can also return objects from methods. The same way as we can pass object, we can also return those objects. But the only thing that you have to remember is that it's not the copy of the object that's being returned, it's only the address that is pointing to that object is being returned. And let me show you an example right here. So in this case, account is our variable to store our object that we're going to return, and we have get account method. Now this get account method is the return type is bank account, so the return type is our class name, and in this case we are returning new bank account balance. And here we are returning this value into our account variable, and in this case 3,200 was going to be returned into the account. But it's not the copy, that's the thing, it's not the copy of this value is being returned, it's the address that is pointing to this value that is being returned. So whenever this value changes, this value will also change. So also each one of your classes has a toString method, and what that means is whenever you will try to print your object, in this case we are creating a object called XYZ company of the class stock. Whenever you try to print that object, you can't specify in which way those values that belong to that object are going to be printed. I will try to find a video that explains toString method for you, and because this PowerPoint does not really explain it very well, so I will find a video and I will post it in our e-learning so that you can be familiar with the toString method. Alright, next thing, the equals method. Very important that you are familiar with how it works with objects, because it works differently with object. You do not, whenever you use the equals operator, you do not compare the values that your object is storing. You're comparing the addresses, the memory addresses of those objects where they are stored. So as you can see here, this is an example. We have stock1 and stock2, two objects which from the first glance they have the same values, GMX and 55.3. However, if you're trying to compare it like this, stock1 equals stock2, this is going to be a mistake because the addresses where those objects are stored are going to be compared and not the values of these objects. So this program is wrong because if you are comparing this expression is going to evaluate to false, even though these objects are seemingly the same, they have the same values, but it's going to evaluate to false because this equal sign is going to try to evaluate and see if the addresses of those objects are the same, which they are not because they are two different entities. Now, how do we work from here, right? We cannot use our equal signs. Well, luckily, Java has an equals method, and that equals method is a perfect way to check if your values of your objects are the same. There are two ways if you want to copy your object. Well, you cannot just use equal sign. That's not gonna happen if you try to copy your object into a new object. However, what you can do, you can do reference only copy, and what that's gonna do, you're gonna copy your address of your object into another reference variable, and a deep copy, that's the right way to do it. Is you're going to create a completely new object, a new instance of the class. Remember that instance of a class is just another way to say object, and you're just going to copy all of the values from one object into our new object, which is, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated, but it is the right way to do it. Now you can also create a constructor that's going to copy an existing object into another object, so it just clones it, and this is the way you would do it. right here, all of the code. You can pause this video and look at it if you want. Another term that you need to be familiar with is aggregation. And aggregation happens whenever you are creating a object from one class and you're referencing it in another class. So it's just gonna create a has a relationship between those two objects. And I'm gonna show you an example of this right here using the UML diagrams. You can see here that we are creating in this course, our constructor that belongs to course has also a we are creating two objects, instructor and textbooks, inside of these of this constructor, which this is our instructor class and this is our textbook class. So it is possible. This is what is aggregation, object aggregation. You should not return references to private data elements, and what that just means, if you have your variables that are private, do not try to return references to those private variables, because it's not going to work the same way as you think it's going to do. The returning references will actually allow anyone who has that reference to modify your private variable, even though it is a private variable. But if anybody that's outside of the code, outside of your class, will get access to that reference, they will be able to modify your variable, and we do not want that. Now, what is a null reference? Null stands for nothingness. So a null reference is just a reference that's going to point to nothing. And if it points to nothing, then you cannot do any operations on it. And it's a good way to test if your values, if your variables point to null before you do anything with them. So this is a good coding practice right here. We are checking if this name variable, if it points to null. If it does not point to null, then we are actually doing some operation. We are doing name to uppercase. So all of the letters are going to be uppercase. Now let me introduce you to my favorite part of Java, which is called method chaining. And sometimes whenever you're working with objects, you will have to go through several layers of those objects. Think of it as an onion. So whenever you're peeling an onion to get to the middle, that's the same way with objects. So this is how you would, if we wanted to get the name of the course. Let me see. Suppose you have a course object name instructor. Yeah. So if we wanted to get the instructor's name and translate it to uppercase, this is all that we would do. We would get the instructor object first, then we would get the instructor's name and we would store it somewhere, and then we would convert it to uppercase. This is 3 lines of code right here. But with the beauty of method chaining, we can just make it into one line. And method chaining just stands for putting one method after the other. And in this case, we have a string called upper name, and then it equals to the object course, and then we're using get instructor, get name, and to uppercase. So we're using all of these methods right here, but we are chaining them together. Now let's look at what it's doing. So this part right here is going to return you an instructor object. Course.getInstructor is going to return you an instructor object. Then the next part is from that instructor object, we're getting the name. So there is a method called getName, which will get us a name, and it's going to return a string. And then the next one, to uppercase. So we are just getting whatever name we got, and we're putting it to uppercase, which is going to return another string. And then the last thing that we're going to do is going to be stored. We're going to store that string that is returned from the last method into the upper name. You can also improve readability by doing this instead of just one line, but it's up to you what you want to do. You might also see a word this, and that's going to be that's called a this reference. And what it does, it just, whenever you are using shadowing, you can just put this, and that's gonna mean that you are referencing an instance field. Whenever your parameter and your instance field, they have the same name, you will use this to refer to the actual instance field. That's the only difference. Alright, I think that's a good place to stop right here, and I'm gonna cover the rest in the next video, and I will see you in the next video.